if you ask me today for the elderly, what is the best recommendation for them is start lifting weight and try to activate all the muscle in your body as much as you can, because that's the best insurance for you to live longer, better.
Dr. Gil Blander, I am so happy to welcome you to The Better Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it, Stephanie.
Yes, I have been working, I've been talking to your team quite a bit, and this is a product and a platform that I'm really excited about, and I think has the potential to really change the way that we empower our patients. One of the things that I talk about often on this podcast is that your health is your responsibility. It's not the government's responsibility. It's not your doctor's. It is absolutely your responsibility. And I think Inside Tracker really aligns beautifully with that. And we're going to talk a lot about what that is, what Inside Tracker is in just a moment. But I'm curious, before we kind of dive into looking at blood markers and looking at biomarkers for longevity and energy and all of that, it's very we'll say rare to have someone with the type of academic background that you have to leave academia and to move into, we'll say, entrepreneurship. So I wondered if you could first just give us a bit of a background in terms of how you got into, the longevity space, the health span space, and then what were some of the defining moments for you where, you may have had mentors or what have you, and said, I actually want to do, instead of maybe staying in research, I want to actually be offering a product to the public?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think that I have been fortunate enough that from very young age, I knew what I want to do. And currently I have two kids. One, she's a teenager, and one that is already in college. And both of them don't know what they want to do. So it's unique. It's interesting for me to see that not everyone is like me, that knew what he wanted to do from a very, very young age. So actually, from the age of 12, I realized that I'm not immortal, and I said that I want to understand, why do we die? How can we extend the lifespan and the health span? How can we delay the onset of aging-related diseases? And that's why I decided to study biology, because I realized that in order to do that, or to try to understand, or to have any intervention, you need to really understand the mechanism. So I studied biology in Israel, a PhD from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. And then I moved to Boston, to MIT, and joined one of the best labs that studied aging in the world, the lab of Flanigan-Rente. Is the scientist that discover SIR2 or SIR1 or serotonins. I'm sure that a lot of your audience know what is that. It's basically histone deacetylase or protein deacetylase that have been shown to extend lifespan in yeast and worms, and some data show even in mice. David Sinclair, which is a professor at Harvard Medical School, and I know that he visited in your podcast in the past, he showed that actually he identified the resveratrol, which is small molecules that concentrated in red wine, have been shown to actually activate SIR1 or SIR2. And there is a lot of excitement right now about the NAD analogs, because it's actually NAD-dependent deacetylase. So definitely I was fortunate enough to be involved in a very exciting a protein that related to longevity. So I spent 5 years at the lab of Flanigan-Rente. And during that time, I became a friend with David Sinclair. And David Sinclair started his own company, Flanigan-Rente, which is the professor that I worked for, had his own company. I was looking for a reagent, and I realized that only a specific company has it. So I went to that company and said, let's work together. And last but not least, during my study at MIT, I looked into skin aging and differentiation. So a cosmetic company, Estee Lauder, that I'm sure that you heard about and your audience heard about, offered me to sponsor my research. So I also had some partnership with Estee Lauder. So all of that explained to me that moving out from the academia to the industry is not something bad to do. It's actually exciting. And I decided after 5 years at MIT to move to the industry, and I selected to work at a computational biology, system biology company. And I saw that it's a very exciting domain, and I didn't know exactly what I want to do, but I knew that I want to start my own company. So during that time, I worked there on caloric restriction, and I developed a model of caloric restriction based on all the publicly available data set that were available at that time, looking at RNA changes. And I developed a model for caloric restriction. And when I developed this model, I also decided to use a few controls. So one control was looking at what happened if you compare young versus old mice versus just caloric restricted versus control mice. And another one was, let's look at resveratrol, which we discussed before, which is a small molecule that David Sinclair showed that it's activator of SIRT1. And I tried to see what are the processes that are modulated by caloric restriction using the platform that I used. And I found that around 18 different processes were changing when you compare caloric restricted mice to not caloric restricted mice. Some of them are well known, inflammation and the insulin pathway and the serotonin pathway and other. But when I looked at the control, what I realized is that in the control, the overlay between the processes that are changing in caloric restriction and resveratrol or young versus old weren't completely full. So only around 10 to 20% of the processes that changes in caloric restriction were mimicked when you treat mice with resveratrol. Or only different 20% were overlay when you look at young versus old mice. So when I looked at this data, it was very interesting for me to see that even the best caloric restricted mimetic at that time, resveratrol, mimic only 10 to 20% of the processes. So then as a scientist, I say, okay, the best one cover 10%, the second one will cover 8%, the next one will cover 7%. So we'll need at least 20 small molecules to actually understand what caloric restriction is doing or mimic it. And then I said, why should we use small molecules? Let's use the food as a drug of choice. Let's move the drug cabinet from the bathroom to the refrigerator. We have 6,000 or 8,000 different food items, and the average American in an average week only use 20 of them. So we have a huge universe, and we are using a very small amount of it. So let's first educate our user what kind of food available to them. And second, feed for them the best food that is good for them based on what's happening inside the body. Because as you said in the introduction, the responsibility of our body is not the responsibility of the physician, it's our responsibility. This is the most sophisticated and complex machine that we have. And we need to know how to feed it, how to fuel it, how to maintain it. And so then we said, okay, but how would we know how a Stephanie body is different than Gil body? So we said, okay, let's try to find biomarkers, something that will tell us what are the issues that each person has in a specific moment. And very early and easily, we focus or zoom into blood biomarkers because blood validates and calibrates everything. Blood is something that it's a quality of a physician level. Our physicians are using blood to make decisions. Also, there is so much data about blood because we study in the scientific community, we study blood for the last 100 years or so. So we have a lot of information, a lot of peer-reviewed data that telling us what is the zone for each blood biomarker, what are the interventions that can increase or decrease specific blood biomarker, what are the specificity for specific subpopulation, male versus females, athletic active versus not athletic active, young versus old. So there is a lot of data there that can allow us to understand what is the situation of our body today? And then when we know that, we can come and say, hey, you have this issue, that issue. Let's build a plan for you. How can you solve all these issues? And we decided that let's do it with a natural and simple intervention. So let's do it with the food, supplement, exercise, and lifestyle changes. So that's basically the story of Gil with a bit of the genesis of Inside Tracker.
I love that. And I think that you can, to your point, blood is scientifically validated, has been studied for, for a very long time. And then if you can replicate the scenario, the important thing is, establishing a baseline. So getting some type of measurement, but then the next time that you get that secondary or tertiary measurement, to replicate the environment with which you had the baseline. So that might be fasted before 10 a.m., let's say. So if you're able to do that over a delta T, over a period of time, then when you're looking at those data points over time, you can start to track, trends, whether you're moving in the way that you want or moving away from the way that you want as well. And I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about some of the someone who's listening might say, well, I can go to my allopathic physician for I can get, a request for blood work, let's say. And I would love for you maybe to dive deeper into the difference between, let's say, going to your allopathic, your traditional medical doctor, and Inside Tracker. And, I mentioned this to you in the pre-chat, like you start with the same raw material, like we're starting with the blood, but what happens after that is where I think that this gets really interesting. So can you speak to some of the differences between, let's say, going to an allopathic physician, getting a request, and then doing it through, or uploading it, let's say, to Inside Tracker?
Yeah. So I think that there is a big difference in the high level. So let me start with that. So physician was trained to fix something that is broken. Okay. So if someone normal, hopefully all of you normal and not sick, you will go to the physician who will tell you, you are normal, go out, and they will kick you out of the also, the physicians are very busy. Each of the physicians, at least in the US, they have 2,000 to 5,000 patients, and they might have 10 minutes for you every time that you are meeting with them. So they cannot go deep. I think that they have a very good intention, a lot of knowledge, but the way that the system is working, and again, at least in the US, is the physicians have been trained to fix something that is broken. What we are trying to do is completely the opposite. We are trying to take someone that is not broken and optimize him, making him better. Okay, so that's the first point that I think that's very important, because that's the definition and the way of viewing of in the case of the physician is the patient. In the case of Inside Tracker is our user or client. Then the physician is using a pretty limited battery of biomarkers. And again, I'm talking about the US. Because
it's the same in Canada. It's the same. Like I'm based in Canada, but they're one and the same. It's just who pays is really the major difference. Yeah,
exactly. So in the US, and sounds like in Canada, there is a very limited amount of blood biomarkers, and the reason for that is the cost. So some of them are the cost is higher, so they are testing what is basically covered by the health insurance. So they are looking at a small amount of biomarkers. I think that they are very good, but they are not covering everything. And another difference is the ranges. So the physician is looking at the normal ranges. And the normal ranges are developed by the lab. And basically they are looking at, let's say, 10,000 patients or people that have been tested with the lab. And they are building basically the mean and the two standard deviation. And if it's and then based on the two standard deviation, they are building the normal range. But the normal range is calculated based on everyone: healthy, sick, young, old, athletic, active, or couch potato, male, female. All of us in one porridge of a normal range. And what we said that's okay for distinguish whether you're broken or not. But if you want to be better or to be optimized or to be special, it's important to develop a range that we call the optimal range. And the optimal range develop specifically to a subpopulation. So we separate between male and females and do it based on your age and different range sometimes for different ethnicity and different range for based on the athletic activity that you do. So one very important point is that the optimal range is very specific for a small subpopulation. So it's usually much narrower than the normal range. And if what is nice that if you are still normal but out of the optimal range, we can still give you some recommendation. What should you do in order to get into the optimal range? And the rationale is very simple. If you are in the optimal range, you are further away from the normal range, and then you have a better chance to continue to be healthy for a longer time. That's the rationale for that. Then we have all the recommendations. So as I said before, physician is very busy and basically was trained to give you the intervention based on drugs. So the physician will come and say, hey, you have ILDL, okay, take statin. Or you have a high glucose, and let's give you metformin. What we are doing, we are giving you alternatives. You can definitely treat those issues with drugs, but it will be nicer and maybe better to treat it with natural and simple intervention. So we're giving you option of nutrition. We are giving you option of supplements. We're giving you options of exercise and lifestyle. And so that's for a specific blood biomarker. But it's a multifactorial situation because we are testing almost 45 blood biomarkers. So if you want to, let's assume that you have 10 of them that are not optimal, it's starting to be very complex because intervention 1 can work for marker 1, but intervention 2 will work for marker 2. So we're trying to find the intervention that cover as many biomarkers that are not optimized at once. And also giving you some option. You can do it using food, you can do it using supplement, you can do it using lifestyle or exercise. Some of them are very easy to do. To take supplement is almost as taking the drug. Every evening you pop it into your body and that's it. Changing your nutrition or changing your exercise might be harder and more time consumer, or lifestyle is even harder. So we're giving you an option and you can build a plan that fit for you. And also the plan can be based on your goal. So your goal can be, I want to improve my inner age or longevity. We can discuss it later. I want to sleep better. I want to work on my overall health. I want to de-stress. And when you choose a goal, we are trying to find what are the blood biomarkers that related to this goal, and also giving you some goal-specific recommendation that will allow you to optimize it. So those are a few differences between going to the primary care physician versus using Inside Tracker.
Yeah. And I don't think that most people realize that lab ranges are very much based on the populace, and it's very much location based. So if you are in, the Northeast, let's say you're on the East Coast, the lab ranges in those labs are going to be different than, let's say, in the Southwest. And then, as you mentioned, those optimized ranges, which are a little tighter than, maybe the standard or what they might call normal ranges, are going to be a little bit tougher, and what we've, sort of tougher to get into, we'll say. And what we've seen over time is, as the population in general, in, I'll say it, Western society. So we're not just talking about the United States and Canada. We're talking about basically any Westernized society. Is over time we have seen, obesity, cardiovascular disease, stroke, like all of these sort of lifestyle diseases have gone off the chart, and such has been reflected in the lab ranges. So the lab ranges have become, you mentioned 2 standard deviations. They've become more loose is the word that's coming to my mind, even though that's not the right term, but they've just become, they have moved in line with the health or lack thereof of the population. So if you're hitting normal, let's say, if your doctor's like, hey, you know what, no problem, your lipids are fine, it's based on how well you're standing up to people today. But if you were to look at lab ranges, let's say from, the 1980s or the 1970s, they would be very different for the same even for the same location. So I do like this idea of moving away from normal, because common is not the same as normal. We've said that many times on the podcast before. When your doctor says, "Oh, your labs are normal," what he's or she's really saying is that you are lining up with everybody else in the populace that you live in the location that you live in, meaning that you are just like everyone else. It's more of a common occurrence versus let's segregate, as you said, by sex, by age, by some of these different very important qualifiers that can now get us a little bit more specific. Which I really like. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I see this a lot because I have a lot of female, I work a lot with, a female population, is they will often tell me, unfortunately to this day, that they have to argue and fight with their primary for labs that, let's say, are not on a standard test. And that's true in the States, that's true in Canada. And I think part of it is, not because the physician is ill-intended. It's not, you had mentioned them being very busy, having a very large patient load, maybe not knowing what to do with it. But I think that the bigger issue is that it doesn't change the standard of care, right? So if you have, let's say, for example, I hear this all the time, like specifically with women with hypothyroid and or Hashimoto's, the doctor will not order, let's say, TPOs, or they won't look at they won't look at the antibody profile of doing the TPOs or TBAGs or whatever, because it doesn't actually change. They're still gonna recommend Synthroid. Whether or not it comes back positive, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change their standard of care. So I think that this is, whether you're working with a functional medical doctor or, a functional practitioner as a whole, one of the things I love about Inside Tracker is that you can kind of take that argumentative piece out of it, right? So you don't have to convince your doctor, why maybe you should be looking at my ferritin. Can you please, and the patient may not know. The patient may not know to advocate for, some of these different biomarkers as well. So this is one of the things that I think is maybe not discussed as often, but at least in the female population that I hear it enough to know that there's a lot of pushback when a female patient goes to a medical doctor and says, "Hey, I'd like my ferritin levels looked at. I'd like my vitamin D levels looked at," both of which are not necessarily standard. And the doctor's like, what are we going to do with that information anyway? It doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's even more than that. If we were to continue to discuss the issue with females, is that if you look at the experiment or the clinical trial in the labs, a lot of those are done on males because males are simpler. We don't need to deal with the cycle, even with a model organism like with mice. It's much easier to take a male mice than a female mice. So I think that a lot of the data that we have is the data on males, and because of that, we know less about females, and it's very hard for us to. A lot of the drugs that were tested on males, and then they imply it on females. But a lot of those clinical trials haven't been done on females. So I think that it's even more undeserved than what you discussed before, and it's the same for specific minorities. So most of the trials are done on a white male, and if you look at a female that is black, then it's even further away, or or Asian, or Hispanic. So I think that there is an issue there. But if we are zooming into the blood biomarkers, definitely there are a lot of biomarkers that are very important for females. Ferritin is a great example, as you describe it. Ferritin is a marker of the amount of iron that you have in your body that's ready to be loaded and build the hemoglobin, which is part of the red blood cells that basically swim into the bloodstream, and they're bringing oxygen from the lungs to the muscle and to the brain. And unfortunately, a lot of women have a low iron in their blood, and they don't know about that. So it's bad for your athletic performance, but it's also bad for your performance in the boardroom, because if you don't have enough oxygen, your brain won't perform as good as it's supposed to do. So, and we see that female, and so it's not news. You can read the peer-reviewed scientific publication and see that premenopausal women, 20 to 30% of them have a low ferritin, and they don't know about that. And it's so easy to fix it via nutrition, via supplementation, via changing of your exercise regime. There are so many things that you can do, but you don't know. So if you cannot manage what you not measure, so if you don't know that, it's very hard for you to take care of it. So that's a great example of something that just by testing hemoglobin and ferritin, you can help a lot of young women to perform better. And unfortunately, our health system is not doing it.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. This is ferritin is sort of like one of the unsung heroes, because not only, you know, all the things that you just said with the, you know, the athletic performance, for example, the women with, if you have a thyroid issue, and let's say you're on medication, you're going to have trouble with your dose if your ferritin levels are low. And we won't, get into all the gynecological issues that can happen for a woman, her sexual function, things like PCOS and fibroids and polyps and endo and all the things that are related to ferritin. And as you were saying, there are things that we can do you have to be consistent with it, but, as you mentioned, with nutrition and eating iron-rich foods and, resistance training and things like that, where you can increase over time your ferritin levels, which I think is really, really important. I think so many women, we just jump to, it must be an estrogen problem. It's like, well, maybe it might be an estrogen problem. But and the same, I would say the same is true with my women with thyroid issues. It's like, well, it's just my thyroid. It's like, maybe, or it could be that your ferritin levels are whacked. Like we need to increase them. Let's talk about a couple more. I would love for you to speak to vitamin D. This is, with my background. So I have a Mediterranean and Middle Eastern background as well. So I am, in terms of cousins with you, you're from Israel. I have family from Lebanon. My genetics, let's say, expect me to be in the sunshine, right? Like Lebanon, Israel, these are, countries with great, very beautiful climates. And of course, you and I, we live in Boston and we live in Toronto. So let's talk about maybe the importance of vitamin D in the body generally. And then maybe this can sort of parse into a discussing about inner age and our genetics as well.
Yeah. So, I think that vitamin D is one of the most important hormones that we have, or vitamins, both vitamin and an hormone. And the major role of vitamin D is to help build the bones together with calcium. But there is a lot of data that show that vitamin D have an additional roles other than that. For example, there is a strong data that show that a correlation between low vitamin D in the blood and the high BMI. So definitely it's related to maintaining your weight and BMI. There is a data that show a very strong data, I think, that came recently with COVID that showed that a subpopulation with a relatively higher vitamin D are dealing with COVID much better than a subpopulation that have lower vitamin D. Definitely there were a lot of information about that in the literature about inflammation and all of that. So the vitamin D is definitely very important based on what I said and what I haven't said. The interesting issue is that, as you mentioned, we were built, if we think about ourselves as a machine, to work under the sunshine and not under the fluorescent light, what most of us are doing most of our time. And the majority of us have a relatively low vitamin D. We can see in our database of Inside Tracker that when a user is coming to us, I would say around 50% of them have a low vitamin D, and they don't know about it. So it's a very important to know your vitamin D and then to try to use intervention to increase the vitamin D. I can tell you that when I started the Inside Tracker more than a decade ago, not surprisingly, my vitamin D was low. And I said, let's try to fix it naturally. So I hate fish because fatty fish have a lot of vitamin D for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Not to say that my house was really stinky because of that, but also
if you ever figure out how to make fish without making the house stink, I want to know, because every time I make it, for days, it's like, did you have salmon? I'm like, yes, we had it on Sunday. Yeah.
So I'm trying to grill it outside. Actually, that's the best way.
That's smart.
The best recommendation. It's pretty good to grill it outside. But anyway, I tested after a few months, and it didn't move the needle at all. So specifically for me, I couldn't increase it. Now, if you look at the recommendation for a supplementation for the RDA, it's around 400 IU in order to increase it. So I tried that, and again I tested again and didn't move the needle. I tried 1,000, didn't move the needle, and then I realized after a few trial and error that actually the amount that it's good for me, it's around 5,000 IU every other day to maintain my vitamin D. But it was very hard for me to know that if I haven't been tested myself. So that's a great example to show how you need to trial and error, because our body is so complex and we are so different than one each other that there is no cookie cutter to come and say, hey, take 400 IU, 1,000 IU, 2,000 IU, 5,000 IU a day. It's important to take it and then test it and see whether you go to the right range or not. So yeah, that's what I want to say about vitamin D. And then what we are doing in Inside Tracker is we are fitting your vitamin D based on the starting level that you have. I'm talking about the supplementation, and based on what we see that is working for you or not. So it's much more complex to come say, hey, you have low vitamin D, okay, take the supplement and you are good, because sometimes it's not enough and sometimes it's too much. And it's better not to be in too much, even so that for vitamin D, it's very hard to be in too much. But for other marker, it's pretty easy, and you always want to be in the range that is optimal for you.
Yeah, and that's an astute observation. Because I've had clients who live in Florida, who you're like, oh, you're in a sunny, you live in an environment where you have exposure to a lot of sun, and they're vitamin D deficient. And to your point around, you can't feel, pain is also very nonspecific, but you can't feel your vitamin D levels increasing or decreasing, in the same way that you can't feel your LDL particle numbers increasing or decreasing. These are things that need to be quantified through things like blood work. I wanted to just touch on one more, which I really talk about a lot on the show, and with my physicians that I teach, and that is metabolic markers of health, things like fasting glucose and HB1C, which are two of the 43 biomarkers that Inside Tracker looks at. Can you speak to the importance of why we want to be looking at HB1C and what that's actually looking at, and then speak to glycation? I mean, you mentioned before, I'm not going to talk about the 18 changes from the resveratrol and the sirtuin activation and all of that, but I would guess, along with inflammation and oxidative stress and membrane, stability, that also things like glycation of the cell is going to decrease as well when you're doing things like caloric restriction and sirtuin accelerators and activators as well.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think that if you look at those two markers that you mentioned, glucose and A1C, those are definitely a couple of the most important markers that we have. Just a simple observation that if you look at the lifespan of a diabetic person versus a person that is not diabetic, on average, the lifespan of the diabetic will be around a decade shorter than someone that is not diabetic.
A decade.
A decade, yeah. So it's pretty big. So so looking at maintaining your glucose and A1C in the right level for your lifespan, and not only when you are old, and it's very similar to what you mentioned about the cholesterol. If I'll go for that for a second, the beginning of The issue that you have with your arteries with a deposit of cholesterol or particle, it's not happening at the age of 70. It's starting from the beginning, from the day that you have been born, your body start to accumulate that. And because of that, it doesn't make sense for you to be worried about LDL or the particle or ApoB at the age of 70. You need to be worried about that at a very young age. It's like, I see it as like investing for your retirement, okay? So you invest for your retirement from the age, hopefully if you're smart, from the age of 18 until the age of 67, and then you start using this money. But if you want to do that for your health, so maintaining your LDL, your particle, your glucose, you will reach to that age sick, and then you won't be able to enjoy the money that you save so hard in your lifespan. So going back to glucose and A1C, so if you're looking at glucose, there is a lot of data in the literature that show that there is a strong correlation between having a relative low glucose in younger age and longevity. Okay, so there is a very strong data from a Framingham Heart study that they basically plotted the level of your glucose, fasting glucose, in a specific age, and then they plot the longevity. And what they have shown that basically, if at the age of 40 you have, let's say, glucose of below 40, so below 80, versus around 85, versus around 90, versus around 95, versus around 100, and then you look at the longevity, you see that a subpopulation that have the lowest one, let's say below 80, lived much longer on average than a subpopulation that have a higher level at the age of 40. So what does it show us? Again, that it's very important to maintain your glucose in as lower level as possible from very young age. Now, if we are looking at or talking about A1C, so A1C is basically, it's looking at the glucose, but instead of looking at the fasting glucose or the glucose at that second, it's looking at basically the average glucose in the last 90 days. Because our red blood cells are reborn or destroyed every, let's say, 90 to 180 days, 120 days. So that means that if you look at the A1C, which is basically glycation of the hemoglobin, you can see the trend of how was your glucose, how good you are in the last quarter, let's say. And there is a very nice a range that show that if you have this level at or below that level or above that level, what is your risk basically to have too high glucose? And in that case, you can get closer to become diabetic. So I think that looking at glucose and maintaining the glucose and the A1C in a good level, and there are so many things that you can do because as you mentioned in your question, those are metabolic related markers. So it's the sugar metabolism, the cholesterol metabolism, triglyceride is one between, and also inflammation. All of that is so important for maintaining a good health. And because of that, those are markers. And by the way, those are markers that your physician will look at it all the time. But because of the ranges, as you said, the ranges becoming looser and looser with more and more diabetic and more obesity, that most of us will be in the normal range, but it's still better to be optimal because then you can delay it and make yourself better. So what we have done at Inside Tracker, we built something that we call InnerAge, which is basically a solution or a feature that look at those metabolic markers, but also other markers, and try to see how do you compare to someone in your age and gender in the markers that either going up or going down during the aging process. So cholesterol is going up, glucose is going up, A1C is going up on average in the aging. But marker like testosterone, specifically for males, is going down with aging. Every year that a male getting older, there is on average he losing 1 to 2% of his testosterone. So we combine all of that to one score that we call it InnerAge, And then you compare your inner age to your chronological age and see whether you are younger or older. Hopefully you are younger. But more than that, because we are looking at blood biomarkers, we can come and tell you, hey, your glucose contribute 1.5 years for you to become older. And your LDL cholesterol contribute another 1.5 years. So then you can zoom in into those two markers and come and say, what can I do to change in order to improve those markers? And then we can give you some intervention related to food, to supplement, to exercise, and lifestyle changes. So I think that inner age is a very nice a feature that allow our users to understand high level what is the issue. Because as you said, there are 43 blood biomarkers for someone that doesn't have, that is not doctor like you and me. It's very hard to understand all of them. And so then we're giving you one number, and then we allow you to zoom in into the marker that is not optimized and give you some tools how to optimize it and allow you hopefully to live longer, better lives. So that's the mission of Inside Tracker.
And that's actually one of the things I wanted to make sure that we came back around to is the recommendations, because we have, you go to let's say your physician or whoever draws the blood, and then they'll say, yep, you're great. Or, hey, your cholesterol isn't where it should be. What often the recommendation that people hear is like, you should be eating less and exercising more. They don't specifically say, maybe you should be lifting weights more, or maybe you should be, changing your meat consumption, or maybe we need to modulate the saturated fat to, mono or polyunsaturated fat composition of your fat intake. And that's one of the things that I really like about Inside Trackers. Not only tells you, okay, here is where you are on the spectrum based on your age and your gender and whatever qualifiers there are. But this is also, if you're not optimized, these are the things that you can do so that you don't have to have letters behind your name in order to interpret what's happening, that the platform itself, the algorithm says, okay, the LDL, let's say the LDL-C is too high, or, your vitamin D is too low, or, your glucose is, maybe higher than it should be. And then it tells you, these are some of the things that you can do, which are, again, scientifically validated. And, when you retest at that 3-month or 6-month point, then you can see how much you've moved the needle, correct?
Yes. And, to add to that, we perform a study on around 1,000 subjects that use Inside Tracker, and we compare the baseline to the follow-up. Again, it's observational study, so we haven't told them, okay, you need to test that day and that day, and we haven't even told them what intervention they should select. They selected intervention out of a battery that we provide them. So we looked at around 1,000 subjects like that. And from that 1,000, we looked at specifically at subpopulation that started with relatively high glucose, or relatively high cholesterol, or relatively high inflammation, or relatively high vitamin D, and then compare the level of those markers for baseline to follow-up. What we have seen that a very strong improvement of those markers from baseline to follow-up in that subpopulation that started with high level. But we also looked at the intervention that they selected. So those 1,000 people selected 525 different interventions. So it's not like all of them said, okay, we'll eat oatmeal, or all of them said, we'll go for a run. It was really personalized, because on average, each intervention was selected by two people. So what we have seen, again, that the approach of Inside Tracker, or what we call personalized wellness or personalized nutrition, worked. And in the subpopulation that started with markers that are out of the normal, we've seen a very nice improvement of those markers, which is very exciting, at least for me, because it's very rewarding to see that something that you developed is working, and the people are. What is more important than improving the quality of their life? So people are doing it, and they really see a positive result. So I'm very encouraged by that. And actually, right now we have a very big database. We have a lot of people that are using Inside Tracker, and we haven't mentioned that, but it's not only blood. We are now collecting DNA and data from fitness trackers. And we decided to start looking at something very simple, like running. So we realized that we have around 15,000 people on the Inside Tracker database that running. And they're running between no running at all to someone that ran ultra marathon or 100 miles. And then we divide them, to put it simple, to a complete couch potato, to someone that run 5K to 10K to half a marathon to a marathon and ultra marathon. And then we looked at the effect on blood biomarkers. And what we have seen, which is very interesting, is that there is a dose-dependent effect on the level of dose metabolic marker that you described before. In you run more, you get a better result. What is nice about that people for definition, we are lazy. So, and also, I'm not sure that most of us can run ultramarathon. So the question is, what is the minimum amount of running that I should do in order to get the highest value of the running? So we are looking into that right now and trying to find, okay, is it enough for me to run 5K every other week in order to optimize the glucose, or I need to run 5K every day? So stuff like that. So that's one thing that is very interesting that we are trying to pinpoint and working on. But in addition to that, we've seen that running is not a magic pill. So there are some issues that running actually make it worse. So for example, and not surprisingly, we discuss it, ferritin. So when you run more, you see that the ferritin going higher. When you run more, you see marker like creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage, going higher. You see cortisol, stress hormone, going higher. So what I'm trying to say, there is no magic intervention. Even running, which is amazing, have some negative issues, and I think that people should know about that. So I think that what is nice about Inside Tracker is not only the recommendation that we are giving to our user based on a peer-reviewed scientific publication, we also started to create science, and based on that, give a better recommendation for our users, but also for the general humanity by publishing this data and allowing people and our scientists to read it and then improve their health and life. And I want to say, you mentioned strength training, and I think that it's almost a magic pill for, especially for the elderly. So if there is any elderly, I would say anyone, I don't want to be mean, but I'm above 50. So everyone above 50 should start having some strength training as much as they can. Because as you said, it's so important. And the reason for that is that we are losing muscle. Like we're losing testosterone every year, we're losing muscle every year, and it's much harder for us to build the muscle again. And then if you look at one of the most prevalence reason that people are dying is because of a fall. What happened? They are falling down, they break their hip, and then when they break the hip, they have operation. The operation is hard. They don't have enough stamina to overcome the operation, and they are dying. So if you build enough muscles, first it's and also balance. First, there is less reason for you to fall. Second, if you will fall, you have enough muscle to protect your hip and other bones. And third, if you still go into operation, your body is more resilient and you have a better chance to live. So if you ask me today for the elderly, what is the best recommendation for them is start lifting weight and try to activate all the muscle in your body as much as you can, because that's the best insurance for you to live longer, better.
I love that. And the only thing I'll add to that is the cognitive decline as well. What we see when someone breaks their hips, or they have that foosh injury, that fall on outstretched hand and they crack the, whatever it is, the radii, the ulna or the femur or the hip, is post-surgery, because they don't have the muscle mass, as you were saying, the bone density, or just the cellular grit and resilience to come over the trauma of the surgery, the reparative surgery. We also see brain decline. Like I don't have the stat just off the top of my head. I'll fact check it for the show notes, but it's some audacious number, like 40 to 50% of patients after a fall, and they've had surgery to repair the ilia or the pubic ramus or whatever was correct. The amount of dementia that these patients endure is it's almost sickening. It's like 40 to 50%, let's say, just from memory. That might be a little bit lower than what it actually is. But we also want to be thinking about that. And to your point around strength training, of course, augments things like BDNF and other neurotrophic growth factors to make your brain kind of bigger and to preserve the gray and the white matter of the brain as we age too. So it is one of those, I know that you are working, with a skin company for like youth, but like really one of the secrets I think for youth is lifting heavy weights for women and for men. So very, very well said there, Doc. So I guess my last question in just our time together here, you mentioned fitness trackers, which I have a couple of questions about that, but I guess my question here is, what is really exciting you right now in the scientific literature? So you're sort of looking at running, like what's sort of the minimum viable product or minimum effective dose that can, sort of optimize ferritin levels and creatine kinase and cholesterol levels, et cetera. Is there anything in addition to that, or maybe that's it, that's exciting you in the scientific literature, and how might you be integrating that into your algorithms and the Inside Tracker world?
Yeah, I think that let's start with fitness tracker. So I see the world as if you look at Inside Tracker today, we have once in the lifetime test, which is the DNA, because your DNA is not changing. So you're testing it once in the lifetime. Then you have the blood, which is, as I said before, liquid gold, amazing. The quality is the best that you can have ever, but you cannot test those 43 biomarkers every day. So it's something that happens, let's say, every quarter to once a year. So basically, I see the blood as a big blood test, as a big mountain of knowledge, mountain of excitement, mountain of scared. Today I went to Quest Diagnostic to get tested. And usually what happened the week before, I'm trying to eat better, I try to exercise better, I try to go to sleep better, because it's like a test, like we're going and taking a test at school. And then you have the fitness tracker. What is nice about the fitness tracker data is coming every day. So basically every day you have, I call it a small hill. So you have the big mountain of the blood, and then you have the small hill of the fitness tracker. You receive resting heart rate and the HRV and VO2 max and the deep sleep and REM sleep and total sleep. A lot of information. I would say that the value of the information is lower than the blood, because the blood, as I said before, it's a liquid gold, 100 years of scientific research and all of that. But there is also a lot of value in the fitness tracker. And also you can correlate between a specific data from a fitness tracker and the blood biomarkers. For example, you had a bad night's sleep last night, and you have a high glucose. That means that most likely your glucose will continue to be high, because it's well known that when you don't sleep well, the controlling of your glucose is worse, or you have high cortisol the same. So I think that what is nice about the data from the fitness tracker, first, it's the cadence. It's come every day. Second is you can correlate it with the blood biomarkers and basically have a proxy. And third, you can gamify it and help the user to understand it and receive some cool information about that. I can give you an example. Recently, we released from Inside Tracker a feature that called post-exercise pro tip. So basically, you go for a run or you go for your weightlifting, and because you have a fitness tracker and you record it, we know that you went to a run or you done a session of weightlifting. And then the question that I have, and I assume that all of us have, okay, how should I replenish my body? How much liquid should I drink? What should be the treatment of the muscle after that? How much stretching should I do? So what you said, okay, let's give you a tool that you finish the exercise, you will receive a notification from Inside Tracker. Hey, Stephanie, you finish a 45 minutes run. Now you need to consume 20 grams of protein and 10 grams of carbohydrate, and that's because that was the length of your exercise and based on your weight and based on a lot of other things. And then we're giving you some alternative. That's how can you consume that? So you can eat this food or that food and giving you some recipe for that. Or alternative, you can receive, hey, you finished a 1.5 hour of a run. And because of that, you need to drink 2 liters of water, and inside of that, you need X amount of electrolyte. So I think that that's something that is very current and useful for the user, because it's very hard. I have a PhD, you are a doctor, and still I'm not sure that, for sure for me, I don't know exactly what I should do. It's hard, it's so many permutations. So giving a tool to explain to the user what should he do following exercise, because we exercise in order to live longer, better life, not in order to injure our body or to deprive our body from nutrient. So I think that tool like that is a very nice one to have for a user. And we're trying to add more and more tools like that allow you to allow Inside Tracker to be your guardian angel for health. So every time that you need to make a decision, we can tell you, hey, Stephanie, you need to go left or right. I really like the analogy of Waze, if you use Waze, the navigation system.
Yeah.
So it's not only taking you from point A to point B, it's showing you alternatives, it's taking into account the traffic, it's showing you if you need to stop for a fuel, it show you the cheapest gas station. If you need to fuel your body, it's showing you the restaurant around. But it doesn't show you the healthy restaurant. So think about Waze, but with the mix of Inside Tracker telling you, hey, this is the best restaurant for you to stop right now, and this is the best dish for you, based on all the blood biomarker that you have and based on what you have done today. So those are the activity that we are trying to lead right now. How can we incorporate Inside Tracker into your life, like how the social media incorporate for you? Because the social media is wasting your time. Basically, you are looking at other people and jealous that they are having fun, while 90% of the time they're not having fun. They're only showing they're having fun when they having fun. And also you are spending time, I post something, and why only 20 made a like and not 25? So you are really, so how can we make something like that addictive? How can we make Inside Tracker addictive that every morning when you wake up, you, instead of looking at Facebook, you look at that. And every time after a run, you will receive a notification or look at Inside Tracker. And every night before you go to sleep, or 2 hours before you go to sleep, you'll look at Inside Tracker, and Inside Tracker will help you to get you ready to the sleep based on everything that you know about you. So that's what I'm trying to focus my brain and some of my team on.
I have to tell you that gamification is the way. I think it is the way. So I'm learning. One of the things I love to do sort of for pleasure is just learn different languages. And I'm trying to write a proficiency exam, to be able to write proficiency exam in French. And one of the things I'm doing is this app, no affiliation, but it's called Duolingo. And it's like a game. And the more I play it, the more points I get, and I'm on the leaderboard. And I see that for Inside Tracker in the same way. And it is like, if you can make something competitive, I am all in for that. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of that. And we have a special code for our better listeners I think it's off the entire store. We'll make sure that code is in our show notes. It'll just be a clickable link that you can head over to and check out Inside Tracker. This has been such a lovely conversation. I'm so excited already for the offerings that you have and the offerings that you are going to be rolling out in the future. So if people want to learn more about, just give a shout out to where people can find Inside Tracker, and if they, want to follow you and more of your work, where they might be able to find you, let's say online.
Yeah, so Inside Tracker is very easy, insidetracker.com. You can find us on social, even that I don't like social. So LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and so on. Specifically for me, because I'm very excited about longevity, we started a podcast called Longevity by Design, which we interview all the leader scientists that working on longevity. For example, David Sinclair was there. We'll have George Church in a couple of weeks, if you heard about him. Andrew Huberman was interviewed by us, and a lot of other scientists that today might be less known, but very good scientists. So we already released 15 episodes, and we are releasing an episode every 2 weeks. Actually, I'm recording another one later today. And the one later today, actually exercise and aging, which is very exciting. So I was very excited to hear you talking about strength training. You can find me in all of those places. You can also find me on social, even that I don't like social. So you can tweet at me or LinkedIn at me and all of that, and I will try to respond to you. And yeah, my vision and my goal is to help people live longer, a better life. And it sounds like, Stephanie, that you and your audience have the same vision. So I will be very excited to work together with you guys and help you live longer, better life.
I am so excited, and I will make sure that the Longevity by Design podcast will also have a link for that in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much.
We will talk very soon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Right in this video here, we're talking all about keto and keto for women, the thyroid, how that is impacted, the role of exogenous ketones in improving our metabolic flexibility. Such a juicy conversation. You're going to love it right here.
Female physiology is hyper reactive to perturbations in physiology. Female physiology and hormonal balance can be offset by a reduction in insulin.